Hey everyone, George here and welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be talking about canister filter maintenance and how important it is to do this, and I'm going to show you some tips and tricks that are going to make it a lot easier. Stick with me and we'll be right back. So in the intro we talked about canister filters and how we probably dread doing maintenance on them because we think it's really difficult, and I'm going to tell you in this video, I'm going to show you some tips and tricks that just make that so much easier. Now almost all canister filters work the same way, and so the one that I'm going to be showing you today is the Aquatop Forza FZ9, which is a UV series. So there's a little more to this one just because it has the UV system built into it, but they're basically all the same. So let's get to this and let's show you some tips and tricks on how to quickly do a maintenance on your canister filter without feeling overwhelmed about it or hating and dreading the idea that you have to do it. When we come back, we'll start the process. The first thing you're going to need to do is have two buckets, a larger one and a smaller one. In the larger one, you're going to be putting the top of your canister in there, which is going to need that deep bucket, and the smaller one is going to be for the water that's inside your canister and a place to store it. And we're going to be using that water later on. The next thing you want to do is to make sure that your canister is unplugged. It is so important to make sure that that is unplugged before you start taking the top off your canister. Before removing the built-in quick disconnect, I want to point out that the color of the hoses is marked so that you cannot put these back on the wrong way. Just follow the instructions before you lift up on the lever. Once you've lifted up on the lever, you want to grab a hold of both sides of the hoses and pull up on it gently. Rock it back and forth just a little bit to make sure that it comes off cleanly. That lever has made it so that no water, with the exception of a few drops that are laying in this little cutout section for the quick disconnect. Other than that, there should be no water at all. Now the next step in the process is to remove the top of the canister. Now some canisters may have 2 clips or 4 clips. In this particular case, the Aquatop Forza series has 4 clips. And I'm going to maneuver the canister by turning it slightly to make sure that all 4 clips are clear of any objects around it. At this point here, I'm going to lift up on the built-in handle and make sure that all the water that is in the top of that is going to drain out before we lift it into our 5-gallon bucket. Once you start to lift it into the 5-gallon bucket, you may not have it completely in there perfectly, and it may slip down in, as you can see here. And if that happens, just know that it's not going to damage it. It didn't fall far enough to have any harm done to it. At this point, you're going to lift up on the handle once again to make sure that all the water that's in there is drained out, and then set it back gently in the bucket. The next step is to make sure the clips are all facing upwards and clear of the body of the canister. And at this point, I'm going to rotate it to a location where I can pour the water from the canister by tilting it very gently and pouring any water that's in the canister into the smaller bucket. Now you may want to place a towel or something underneath it to ensure that any water that may drip out of the sides does go on to the towel and doesn't harm either your rugs or your hardwood floors. And then gently set your canister back down. Now we're going to be using this water for other things here, and we'll show you that in just a second. Now, as I said in the previous segment, we're going to keep the water that's in this smaller bucket, and I'll show you what we're going to use that for in just a minute. At this point, you want to lift out the main portion of the top of the canister out of your 5-gallon bucket and place it into the smaller white bucket temporarily. Now make sure that you've moved the cord out of the way and it's stable, and also make sure that the handle is in the down position so that you don't bump into it and knock it over. At this point, you want to make sure that all the clips are facing upwards before you start to remove the trays from the canister body. Now I have removed most of the trays out of here to save time, and I'm just going to show you on this last tray here to allow it to drain before you lift it out and put it into your bucket, and that way you don't make a mess with the water that's on there. There will be a small amount, but not enough to really do any harm. Now lift it out, set it gently into your 5-gallon bucket, and at this point here you're going to remove the sponge or loosen the sponge at this point, and you're going to take the remaining water that's in your canister and dump it into that smaller bucket. But before you do that, you're going to again take the main part of the top of your canister filter and set it back into your 5-gallon bucket gently. And at this point you're going to take the canister, spin it around to an area where it's clear to dump the remaining part of the water that's in the canister into your smaller bucket. Now, as I said, this water is going to be used, and what we're going to do is we're going to be using this water to clean our sponges out, and I'll show you that in just a second. You don't want to use chlorinated water. You want to make sure that you're using water that came out of your tank, and that way you're not killing off any of the beneficial bacteria that's in there. At this point, I'm removing the sponge that's inside any remaining sponges, and again, I'm going to take a second to rinse them out into the smaller bucket, but I'm going to make sure that they're drained. Just gently, squeeze them a little bit, and that really should be enough to make the process work really well. So once you've cleaned all of your canister biomaterials, your sponges, and anything else that needs to go back in, you want to start reassembling your trays. And as you can see here, I'm putting the sponge back in, and I'm making sure that it's lined up correctly with the hole for the cylinder where the UV light goes down. And I'm also replacing the biomaterials back into the tray out of the water that came from the tank. Now, I've left those in there because they have beneficial bacteria on them, and you want to make sure that they're replaced into the tray, and make sure that they're level in there so that when you place the next canister on top of this one, that it seats itself flat and there's nothing in the way. So again, you just want to gently place those back in there. At this point here, you're going to take your top of your canister and place it back into that smaller bucket, and then start putting the trays back into your main canister body. Now again, make sure that the cylinders are all lined up in the same direction. It really doesn't matter how they're placed in there, but you want to make sure they're put in there in a way that the quick connect is in a position to go back on there correctly. And again, the cylinders should all be facing in the same direction. Each tray, the round cutout in there is all stacked correctly. Now your final piece that you put in, again, make sure that it's lined up correctly and seated properly in the top of it. Now it may be a little bit difficult to get this in here, but just work at it a little bit and it should be just fine. So at this point here, we're just making some final adjustments on this, and at this point we're going to take the top of the canister and make sure the cord's out of the way, and make sure the cylinder that you see here goes down into that cylinder hole where all the trays are lined up correctly inside. Now, it may not perfectly fit when you place it on the top, so you may have to be careful and push down on it a little bit, making sure that it's seated correctly, and be very gentle at this point here because you don't want to crack anything or break it. And then just snap all of your connections and clips in place, all 4 of them. Make sure all 4 are back in place. And at this point here, you're going to spin the main body of the canister around and make sure your cord's in the right position and fed underneath or wherever it needs to go so that you can plug it back in. Once you've done that, you're going to take your quick connect, disconnect, and you're going to put it back into the main body of the cylinder. And basically, as I said, you really can't mess this up because they're color coded with blue and red, and you can see that. But just push down on them gently to make sure that they're seated, and then flip that lever back down. Now, once you flip that lever back down, you're going to start to hear water filling into that cylinder, and that may be a little alarming to you, but that's very normal. So you want to allow for that to fill up before you start plugging in your system. Make sure, that's very important, to make sure that that is completely filled before you do that. I wanted to quickly show you how much materials we did get out of this canister, to show you that about every 3 months, if you do this, you will keep your canister in top shape. So as I said at the end of the last segment there, if you do this about once every 3 months, you're really going to keep up on the maintenance of these canister filters. As I said, always be careful to save water from your aquarium, to make sure that you're rinsing out your sponges, your biomaterial, or anything else that you're cleaning out of your canister, so that you do not destroy the colonies of biological bacteria that are in your canister. If you use chlorinated water, you're going to damage that, and you could mess up the water parameters in your tank if this is solely what you're depending on. Now, if you're using this canister as a supplementary filtration, I still recommend doing it that way. I don't recommend ever using chlorinated water, but at the same time, it's not as crucial. But again, that's my recommendation, and I think that's really important. Now, while you're doing this, you want to check all of the seals that are on your canister to make sure that they're all in good shape. If your canister is older and it's been around a while, there's a possibility your seals are getting a little bit brittle or dried out, and you want to make sure that you're paying attention to that so that you can order some new ones from whatever the company is. In this particular case, we're using the Aquatop Forza FZ9 series, which has the UV light built into it, and so I know that I can go to that company and make sure that I get parts for it. So thank you for joining me today. I hope that this helps you to understand how to clean a canister filter correctly. Your canister filter may not be exactly the same, but you get the general idea. Please give me a thumbs up on this, and also leave your comments down below. We always like to hear from you. And if I left anything out, or you wanted to add something to this, please leave that information below. Now, I have done other maintenance videos on this channel before, but I think this is the first time we've ever completely gone through a canister, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Again, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Got a lot of great things coming up. We will see you on the next one. Until then, we're out of here.